Hey loves, Haley Steinfeld here. Let's be real. When I'm on the red carpet, everyone wants to know whose dress I'm wearing. But here's the thing. We're so focused on those details, we're missing something that's actually way more important. Breast health. It's wild. Breasts get so much attention, but they're still so ignored when it matters most. Don't know what I'm talking about? Tune in on February 9th and visit yourattentionplease.com. That's yourattentionplease.com. See you then.
BTW FYI. Visit Nexplanon.com RN to learn about Nexplanon. It's an gestural implant, 68 milligrams radiopaque. Or ask your HCP IRL. Okay, TTYL.
Support for this podcast comes from CDTA, The Eagle, a Times Union podcast driven by CDTA. The old groundhog saw his shadow this week, but honestly, there was so much going on that we didn't really even have time to think about how many more weeks of winter lay ahead. I'm Jessica Marshall, here with this week's episode of The Eagle, a Times Union podcast. First, we are going to go over this week's top stories, handing it over now to the Times Union editor-in-chief.
Hi, I'm Casey Seiler, the editor-in-chief of the Times Union, and as always, I'm pleased to be on the line with Brendan Lyons, our managing editor for investigations and State House bureau chief, one of the most outstanding journalistic player coaches I have worked with. And proving that once again, Brendan, on Tuesday evening, you broke news in one of the most significant stories that we've been following, one of the biggest regional stories in quite a while, which is the death of Robert Brooks, who was an inmate who was, we can now say with even greater accuracy, beaten to death at Marcy Correctional Facility by a group of guards on the evening of December 9th. He was declared dead early in the morning on December 10th. And the developments here involve the completed autopsy for Mr. Brooks.
That's right. Everyone has been anxiously awaiting the final determination on what caused his death and whether or not, whether drugs were a factor, for instance. And although there was some synthetic marijuana in his blood, a medical examiner from Onondaga County ruled that Mr. Brooks unfortunately died as a result of a compressed neck and blunt force impact injuries. So this now shifts to a grand jury review that is scheduled to begin on Monday, February 10th, and that will take place in Oneida County, where William Fitzpatrick's office has been enlisted as a special prosecutor to pursue criminal charges if warranted. And as you know, Governor Hochul issued a statement following the reporting in our story about this and urging the district attorney to move quickly forward with criminal charges and arrest people, which is an unusual statement from a governor, but that sort of echoes what many lawmakers are saying. And the last thing I'll say on this too is that in talking to people involved in the case on both sides, it appears right now that no offers or plea bargains are being put on the table. And that is unsettling to especially the correction officers who were there and witnessed it, but did not take part in the physical beating of Mr. Brooks.
And is if you were trying to get in the mind of the prosecutors who are considering whether or not any kind of plea deals are going to be made, would you say that it's likely that is in part due to the abundant, although not overabundant, video evidence that is available in this case, which is just not there in similar cases of alleged violence by correction officers? We have reported on the fact that there was video with no audio footage from 4 different body-worn cameras that were essentially kind of, not to get too poetic, but kind of served as mute witness, as it were, to this, that the eyewitness testimony, which is, of course, can be faulty, is provided by the different perspectives, of the body cams.
Sure. If not for those body cams, which were passively recording, right? So people know that that means they were turned on but not activated. And the unbeknownst to the people in that room, these devices were recording without audio, and that has produced this overwhelming evidence of excessive force against multiple officers in this case. One thing I've always wondered is, had those not been recording, this would have looked much different on paper after the fact. You can bet. You can bet on that. But the thing about the prosecution is that they need someone who was in that room to tell them and be a witness to tell them what was being said, what had prompted this, and what was going on here. And I think that you will eventually see someone step forward and agree to cooperate in exchange for some type of deal. Maybe even just to keep their job or avoid a official misconduct charge. But the defense attorneys, think that it's critical for the prosecution to establish what was going on there beyond what we can see, and why were they doing this, and was for instance anyone ordering them to do this, or telling them to stop, or any of those things.
Sticking with state correctional facilities for a moment, on a very different story about conditions inside state prisons. You've been reporting over the course of the last probably 10 days or so on a series of episodes in which prison workers have been rushed to hospitals after exhibiting symptoms ranging from fainting to slurred speech. I'm reading the lead of one of your outstanding stories that were suspected of being connected to exposure to toxic narcotic substances. But in the most recent story you did, you noted that there has been very scant evidence of an actual chemical cause for these, that in fact the cause might be a form of mass psychosis.
That's right. I did not score a lot of points with some of my friends in the corrections business on this one, but it's a unique phenomena, and it is what seems to be a stress-induced reaction that you have law enforcement officials, police, correction officers, and this has gone on for years, who are told fentanyl is dangerous. If you touch it, you can overdose. It might kill you. And so there have been instances where police open up the back of an SUV, and an officer says to his partner, "Hey, that's a mountain of fentanyl right there. Be careful with that stuff." And then the other gentleman, this is a true case, passed out and collapsed on the ground and was given Narcan. And Narcan seemed to have what they call the desired effect. But experts in toxicology say that you cannot get the level of exposure that these people are experiencing from just passive contact with the drug. Fentanyl, for instance, is not an airborne particle, so it doesn't just float through the air and you breathe it in. The other thing is that the symptoms of some of them are different. So in an incident at Midstate, a sergeant and another officer who responded to an area where one of their colleagues had just passed out and was given Narcan again, they started feeling tingling in their faces, and eventually they were brought to the infirmary where they were laughing uncontrollably. And that is not a symptom of an opioid exposure. For their part, the corrections officers raised the issue that this could be some type of new synthetic drug that maybe is not detectable. And they, being the prison population, are very crafty at what they do. And one thing I learned last week was that they will have people on the outside spray paper with wasp killer, and they then mail them that piece of paper, which they smoke, and apparently it produces some type of high. So they contend that it could be something else that they're being exposed to, but the experts say it is very highly unlikely. I watched a show the other night on National Geographic where there was Border Patrol at the southern border, and a Customs and Border Patrol agent was tearing apart this car, and he found boxes upon boxes of bundles of fentanyl, methamphetamine, And he was probably ripping this car apart for a good 20 minutes and just stacking all of these giant things of fentanyl and stuff. And all he had on was an N95 mask and latex gloves, and there was no adverse symptoms that he had. That was the position of the toxicologist, which is that they could put a pile of fentanyl on your desk, leave it there, come back in an hour. If you've been working next to it the whole time, you would be fine. You're not going to breathe it in. So stay tuned on this one.
Just to jump back with what you started off with, saying that these stories have not cheered our readers who either who are correction workers or have correction workers in their family. I responded to one of these emails saying, "Look, nobody is saying these people are shamming or faking it to get out of work. Nobody loves a trip to the hospital, but rather these stories are a reflection of just how complex and difficult workspaces prisons are, that you are faced by physical dangers as well as stress induced psychological risks as well. It's not putting
That's
down
it.
correction workers in any way."
That's right. That's what the experts will tell you, that these people are not faking. To them, it's real. They are having a reaction to something that they perceive is poisoning them. And sometimes it's passive, and so they are passing out. But as far as the argument that, well, the Narcan revived them, therefore it's opioids, that's not necessarily the case, because just having the jolt of something cold, injected into your nasal cavity might have the effect of you saying, "Oh, wait, now I feel better. I feel better." So, um, and nobody that I could find has, other than somebody who told me that someone tested positive for drugs during a self-test, there's no evidence that anybody has tested positive yet for drugs from one of these exposures.
So, switching topics from the world of corrections to the world of politics, your team has been doing an outstanding job, especially Lucy Hodgman, covering the seemingly imminent, but perhaps not so imminent, special election in the 21st congressional district. That, of course, is the seat currently, as we are talking on Thursday. That is the situation as we are talking on Thursday morning. The seat held by Elise Stefanik. She, of course, has been named to be the new UN ambassador, but there is a possibility that that seat might not be vacated for at least a couple of weeks, and potentially, if some Democrats get their way, even longer than that. I'll let you elaborate.
Yeah, so the Democrats huddled last week and over the weekend, and has strategized about whether they could change state law to allow the special election in this case to be dragged out, to be delayed until the summer. And the motive there is not to position the Democratic candidate to try to get a better campaign or anything. They feel that it's a district they are unlikely to win. But in their mind, if Elise Stefanik is confirmed as UN ambassador and steps down, it would leave an empty seat in a very tight House, and weaken the ability of the Trump administration, for instance, to get through some of its package of legislations. So that has sort of fallen apart. It seems that lost any momentum. How it works is the governor has 10 days once the congresswoman would resign to schedule the election within the next 70 to 80 days. But as Lucy Hodgman reported this week, it's now the Republicans who are pumping the brakes on this. And apparently, they have said to Ms. Stefanik that we may not confirm you until April 2nd. And that is the day after special election in Florida would determine two other congressional seats that were vacated by Republicans. One was Matt Gaetz' seat, and the other one was the gentleman whose name I forget that has taken a position with the Trump administration. So, as it turns out, this may, in fact, this election not happen until June, and the field is tightening. The Democrats have picked their candidate already, which is unusual to come out this early. But a dairy farmer, Blake Endabian, is their pick, and with the Republicans, they're still battling it out, and it's very colorful and fun to watch as Rensselaer County Executive Steve McLaughlin and Sticker Mule CEO Anthony Constantino do battle on Twitter.
Yeah, that's a treat. I'm no longer on Twitter, but I do love watching it from the sidelines. Brendan, all great stuff. Thank you for all the good work to you, as well as our Capitol Bureau and our investigative team. Keep it up.
You bet.
To read more about all of the stories that Casey and Brendan just discussed, and for more of the latest news and features we've got going on, head over to timesunion.com or check us out on any of our social channels. We're on all of them: Facebook, Blue Sky, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, you name it. Gonna take a short break now. When we come back, business reporter Kelsey Brown will share her thoughts on Stewart's revamped version of Mountain Brew.
Why is healthcare so expensive? What's happening with climate change? And are elections safe? You can find answers to those questions and a lot more with Capitol Confidential from me, Dan Clark. I give you the latest news and analysis from the state capitol and beyond. Sign up now at capitolconfidential.com. That's Capitol with an O, confidential.com.
If you're enjoying this podcast, take advantage of all the Times Union has to offer and support our efforts to bring you award-winning journalism by becoming a Times Union subscriber today. Go to timesunion.com/subscribe.
Welcome back. You're listening to The Eagle, a Times Union podcast. I'm Jessica Marshall. Well, there's been a lot of focus on political news in the last month, which is not really a surprise, but there is a lot going on in our business section too. Joining me now on the show is business reporter Kelsey Brown. She's going to give us a little roundup of business stories that she's been covering. You have been with us at the Times Union now for about 6 months, right? You came.
Yeah, actually, I think tomorrow's my 6-month anniversary.
Nice. And you come from California, which is 3,000 miles away from here. Had you, before you came here, had you been to New York? Did you have any kind of sense of New York, you know, in terms of news, the business beat, any of that stuff?
Oh, I had no clue. I was coming in completely blind. I think in 3rd grade, I went to New York City and Connecticut to visit my mom's childhood best friend. But obviously I didn't have much knowledge from that experience. So it's been a lot of firsts being out here.
Absolutely. Well, you're doing a bang-up job.
Thank you.
You are on the business beat. You have done a lot in your 6 months here. I want to kind of do a little bit of a roundup of business stories for this episode. So I want to start with one that you have coming out this week. It's about the Lark Street bid and some of the issues that it has been facing lately. So before we get into what's happening, what is the Lark Street bid?
So the Lark Street Bid is a nonprofit organization that's responsible for street beautification, safety, special events, and promoting the corridor. There's 3 bids in Albany. There's the Central Avenue bid, which is one of the largest in the state. And then there's also the downtown bid.
All right, so there's 3 bids. Mm-hmm. Lark Street is the one that gets kind of the least funding. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that is accurate. Funding comes from a special assessment that property owners pay to the city. The downtown bid obviously receives a lot of money because they have skyscrapers, and the Central Avenue bid receives a lot of money because it's one of the longest bids in the state. Lark Street is made up of 3-story, 4-story buildings. There isn't a lot of large commercial buildings where they're receiving a lot of funding.
But there's a lot of businesses, right?
A lot of small businesses. So it just doesn't equate to the same amount of funding. For example, downtown bid receives around $845,000. Central Avenue receives around $650,000. Again,
this is annually?
Yeah, annually. And this is from the special assessment, while the Lark Street bid receives $90,000.
That's a big difference. Now, Lark Street has been in the news a lot for different reasons. There's been some violence on the street. There's been some issues with businesses. Can you kind of characterize what is happening in a larger sphere on Lark Street?
Yeah, there definitely was an uptick in violence during a certain period of the year last year. There's been businesses that are struggling, some businesses that have closed, like NYX Bakery. One of the biggest complaints that I hear on Lark Street is that there isn't the same amount of events and just like sense of community that there used to be on Lark. So many people want Larkfest to come back. Larkfest hasn't made an appearance since pre-COVID. And with a $90,000 budget, the Lark Street chairman explained that it costs around $100,000 to host Larkfest. And so it's just really difficult for them to be able to throw these big events that people really miss and want with such a little budget.
There's a lot of people that are unhappy with the job that the bid has been doing.
People are complaining about how bid is operating, but I think people also have a lot of understanding for why it's operating so poorly. Like the other bids have full-time executive directors. Lark Street bid can only afford a part-time executive director. And then even just having that role takes up a substantial chunk of the funds that they receive. So people understand that there is a lack of staffing, there's a lack of money, but they're still frustrated. Jesse Sommer, he owns New Scotland Spirits Tasting Room. He is kind of a person who acted as a catalyst in this. He sent out an email at the beginning of January to 386 people who were business owners, residents, and was calling for a bid to be dissolved. And his whole opinion is that he believes that business owners can do the same job as bid without having to jump through all these hoops that the bid makes them. He thinks that businesses are capable of getting the permits, being able to host events, and wants to have that freedom to be able to help restore Lark to what he remembers it to be.
Now, you mentioned this a little bit with Jesse, but are there proposed solutions, right, like to this, like whether it's dissolving the bid or having the bid do something in a different way? Like, what are the kind of suggestions for improvement, if you will?
They're really struggling to have community participation. They've not had quorum at a lot of their meetings, and without quorum, they can't act on anything. They can't vote on anything. One solution is that they really need more community engagement from residential people, from business owners.
All right, so it's a complicated issue, not one that's likely to be solved anytime soon, and I'm sure that you'll be following up on it. I want to touch on two other business stories that you have covered in recent times. This is about fashion, actually, and a very unique fashion designer in the area. So tell us about that story, about the purses.
Yeah, Kima is the name of the fashion designer. She's based in Albany, and this is going to be her first time at New York Fashion Week. Her runway's this Sunday, February 9th at 11 a.m. At Runway 7. It's going to be a collection of 9 handbags, and the unique part is that they're all made out of wood.
That is so cool. Like, just to describe one for me.
So a lot of them are kind of circular shape. Basically what she does is she sends a plain piece of wood to an artist. An artist paints a creation on it. There's one that has like a white lion that's on a spacey blue background. And then they send it back. Sometimes she adds opals. She has diamonds on some bags. Wow. And then she covers them in epoxy for protection. And then she uses sometimes like leather or different things to fasten these two pieces of wood together. And it's surprisingly functional, because I think when people hear wood bag, they're like, how does that work? And she said that she has some problems trying to sell them online because people can't really conceptualize them, but they're beautiful. They actually do work very functionally, and they're very unique.
And she has, you said, an online store. Is that where you can get them? She doesn't have a storefront or anything like that?
Yeah, she sells online. Sometimes she goes to events and sells things. She works out of this business incubator, which is actually in the central Lark Bid district, STEAM. She has a really cool workshop that has like a whole wall of power tools. She has drills, mallets, hammers. It's a pretty cool place.
That's amazing. You can see photos of her studio on timesunion.com. All right, one more story. The last one we actually had a little bit of fun with this week. Stewart's Mountain Brew lager is back. If you grew up here, if you are very familiar with Stewart's, you might remember Mountain Brew as a throwback that Stewart's produced for a while. It was discontinued, but now it's back. Tell us, how did it come back?
Stewart's, as we all know, has quite a following. And I think people were asking Stewart's to bring it back. They discontinued it in 2020. It didn't have great sales. When I was talking to a PR person from Stewart's, he said that he heard often that the old recipe tasted like motor oil. So
I, honestly never tried it, but I have heard similar things.
Yeah, he's like, people weren't buying it for the flavor. They were buying it for the value. So they hoped in making this new recipe that people would want to buy it for the flavor this time while also keeping good value.
How much was it initially? It was like really cheap, right?
Yeah, before it was a 6-pack of 12-ounce cans, and it was $2.99.
Yeah,
now,
a good deal.
It's a good deal, yeah, definitely. Now it's going to be a 2-pack of 19.2-ounce cans for $4.
So they're keeping it close to the original, more or less. I didn't do the math, but yeah.
Yeah, and we, like Jess said, we tried it in the newsroom yesterday, and we were all surprised at how good it was. Like, I would buy it without even knowing it's a Stewart's beer. I would definitely try it again.
To tack on to that, going back to the fact that you are from California and you have not spent any time here prior to coming here to work for the Times-Union, you didn't quite understand the mania around Stewart's. Like, what was that like coming into that?
Oh, it's been super fun. It's just kind of like immersing myself in upstate culture. I think my first night that I actually stayed here, before I even moved into my apartment, I had to grab some snack, something late at night I was staying at a hotel, and I went to Stewart's, and I had no idea how big of a thing it was. I just was like, oh, cute little gas station, whatever. No, it's a whole cultural phenomenon out here. And I'm very proud to say that I am the owner of a Stewart's hat now. So I am completely upstate now.
Fantastic. Well, we're glad to have you.
Glad to be here.
You want more business news? Head over to timesunion.com. And we also have a delightful video of Kelsey sampling Mountain Brew for the first time on our social channels. Check it out. That's it for this week. We'll be back next week with another look inside our newsroom. The Eagle is a production of the Times-Union. It's produced and edited by myself, Jessica Marshall, with help from Erica Smith and the Times-Union digital team. Our music is Flyin' by Top Floor. Special thanks to Casey Seiler, Brendan Lyons, and Kelsey Brown for their contributions to this episode. Got questions or comments about the Eagle or any of our podcasts here at the Times-Union? We have several more. Email us at podcast@timesunion.com. Support for this podcast comes from CDTA, The Eagle, a Times-Union podcast driven by CDTA.